and welcome to yet another edition of Bits to Billions, the unicorn story. We are in the offices of Vedantu, an online tutoring firm that caters to K-12 students as well as test prep examinations. We are going to meet its co-founder and CEO Vamsi Krishna, who is currently hard at work teaching students, but he's going to join us after the class.
Hello students, welcome. आज हम शुरू करने वाले हैं electrostatics. All of you would have heard about this charges, positive charge, negative charge, right? What is charge? चलो फटाफट सभी अपने चैट में लिखो. What do you think of charge? What is charge? Right? So charge एक fundamental property of matter. समझ में आया?
So Vamsi, आज क्लास कैसी थी?
बहुत ही energizing थी. But you should be asking the kids that question.
I'm wondering if I should call you Vamsi or Vamsi Sir, because you know that's how I hear people addressing you on YouTube and other platforms.
So the fun part is कि that thing has gone into the Vedantu management culture as well. तो काफी जगह वंशी सर हो जाता है, पुलकित सर हो जाता है.
But you know, you don't teach that often these days, right? You're more busy with running the business and fundraising and other things. Do you miss teaching?
Oh, absolutely, Chandra. I mean, that's really something which is really meditative, to say the least. And I used to do this almost like 4 hours kind of in a day kind of a routine, almost for 8-9 years of my life. After Vedantu, and especially over the last 3-4 years, it has gone down substantially to a few hours in a month now. But I'm trying to substitute that because teaching is something which is very energizing. So if I'm not teaching the kids, at least I'm trying to take opportunities to teach the management or anyone something. So as long as it's teaching, it's very energizing. So I'm trying to do that myself and also encouraging my other senior management to do the same.
Vamsi, you know, the last couple of years have almost been a boon for companies like yours, because though you started in 2014, online tutoring really took off in the last year. But you know, now with schools reopening, people are wondering, will parents still pay for online coaching classes when schools are there?
Yes.
And schools are already expensive. On top of that, will you also pay for Vedantu? So a lot of edtech companies like yours are expected to see, a challenging phase going forward. How are you preparing for it?
So great question, Chandra. So there is both a short-term and a long-term perspective to this. In fact, I should tell you this, that many people have started noticing online education and online tutoring, especially in COVID times. But this is a sector which has been booming even before that. So just to give you some stat, as Vedantu itself, we started live tutoring in 2014, right? And yeah, needless to say, it was an unknown term.
Correct.
And in COVID, that term really became mainstream. But even before that, from 2018 to almost 2020, we as a company have been growing 2x minimum year on year, right? But yes, that growth rate compared to the growth rate we witnessed as an industry and as a company in COVID times is pretty different. The last 2 years, we had around 9.5x kind of a growth. So what happens in a short-term perspective, and you're very right, when you look at a 9.5x kind of a growth rate, and then when these things recede, you'd obviously go back to the normal growth space.
So has it already happened for you, where from 9x you're coming to 4x?
I think since October onwards, we have been seeing a lot of these trends happening, right? And obviously as an entrepreneur, 9x expecting 9.5x kind of a growth rate is crazy. That's almost like a hyper growth. Realistically speaking, I believe that it will graduate from a hyper growth state to a growth state, wherein we'll see a 2x, 3x kind of a growth rate, which itself is great. But what really happens, and as you rightly said, when you are used to a 9.5x kind of a growth rate, that coming down to a 3x or 4x is unnerving in the short-term perspective, right? And that will have its own set of challenges, right? The expectation setting, right? Growth setting, a lot of rationalization. All these things are happening, will happen, and not just in India. It's actually happening globally as well. I'm sure you have tracked stocks of this thing globally as well. So all this will happen in a short term. Long term, Chandra, if you look at the macro view, and that is what I am most excited about. If you look at India today, and let's just talk about K-12, there are 300 million kids in India. Out of that, around 90 to 95 million kids have access to internet and can afford some of these services. Almost all of them go for some form of the after school tutoring, right? That's the market, right? So these are the guys who are going there despite they going to schools, because there is some gap the parents want to fulfill, right? So in a sense that online education companies, including Vedantu, are not creating a new market. There's a market which has been there. You and I have also, been part of that.
Yeah.
So it's a huge after school, tutoring space which has been traditionally there and very big actually, and it's been there for centuries. That's really the segment which companies like us are trying to disrupt. And disrupt in a sense of two things. How do you provide a better quality teaching in especially these remote tier 3, tier 4 at lesser of a price point, right? So that market, which is already there offline, is what these online companies are trying to organize, and bring disruption to in terms of quality and price. So that market is something which is always there. As long as that market continues, there's a huge opportunity for online disruptions, because offline, and I can tell you this because I operated an offline segment for almost like 7-8 years, right? That doesn't have the capability to disrupt at scale, especially in remote tier 3, tier 4 locations for a country like India. So for us, for a country like India, which is such huge diversity, technology is the only way we can actually create some change and disruption, and that is where the opportunity lies.
Right. Vamsi, we are already beginning to see signs of stress in not just in edtechs but startups broadly. Sure. Many of them have announced layoffs. Vedantu also had some layoffs. So are we preparing for some tough times? Everybody's already talking about a funding winter, that winter has already arrived.
I definitely think so, right? And have been in this space for like over a decade now. I'm sure, Chandra, you also know this from your own experience, that these are cycles, and it's important to recognize these cycles, right? The last 2 years, 3 years, the kind of like a growth spree which we have seen, it's actually not appropriate for anyone to expect those things to continue, right? And as anything, like the crest, as high it is, the trough will also be deep. So
but you're still smiling.
Yeah. Because for me, if I can recall, in 2015, I saw a very similar thing, right? In 2015, if you recall, we had a huge, right, funding spree, a lot of companies getting funded. Even Vedantu was there at that time, although we were very small. And then in 2016, it was almost like the words were very similar, eerily similar, right? It was a funding winter and so on and so forth. Yes, these are tough times, tough calls are taken, not great. As an entrepreneur, it's not something to be like, happy about. These things are very de-energizing. But I also believe that very strong companies arise out of those opportunities. If you look at Amazon, right, into the 2000 bubble burst, I think its share value came down by 15 times, right? And it had almost like 2 or 3 months of runway left. And then they persisted. A lot of other companies, Amazon, I'm just taking an example, and now look at where these companies are. So I also believe that these are tough things, like cycles do come, but the resilient ones actually persist and they come out stronger. So that's probably something which every founder should be planning for, that a small cycle of 1 year, 2 year, if it's strong enough that it shakes your company to the core and out of existence, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the company itself, right? So that's how I look at it.
Preparing for tough times is something Vedantu is used to by now, as it has seen boom and bust cycles in the past. It came very close to a near-death experience in 2017 when an investor pulled back from funding when it had just 3 weeks of cash left. But it survived and went on to become India's 5th edtech unicorn in 2021 and now competes with the likes of Byjus and Unacademy. Founded by Vamsi Krishna, Pulkit Jain, Anand Prakash and Saurabh Saxena in 2014, Vedantu currently provides live coaching classes for K-12 students, including entrance exams such as IIT, JEE, Main and Advanced for engineering and NEET for medical colleges. It also provides classes for CBSE and ICSE as well as various state boards. Vedantu said it has around 36 million monthly users through its app and web and has ambitions of going public in a few years' time. But these are tough times for Vedantu and other edtechs, as demand for online learning is coming down post-pandemic and schools reopening. Vedantu has laid off 624 employees in the last month as it is expecting a scarcity of funds in the coming quarters amidst a slowdown in global financial markets.
You are someone who's kind of survived those troughs and crests. So sometimes, it almost feels like Vedantu is a cockroach kind of startup, because cockroaches are known to survive even nuclear explosions. So is that going to be your strategy here, to just kind of be there, ride it out? Because I think we are in for some, 12 to 18 months of perhaps a slow phase.
Absolutely, Chandra. I think all startups need to be cockroaches, I guess. But yeah, jokes apart, staying in the game is very important. I'm a big believer of compounding and the power of compounding. And I think if you stay in the game, you allow the time to have its compounding impact. So yes, for any big transformations, any big changes to happen, takes time. So resilience is extremely critical. Having said that, you need to grab onto your opportunities. For example, for us, the COVID times was a huge opportunity. That was a place where all the parents were there, the space was there, a land grab was required, and obviously we went aggressive, and like many others did too. But that doesn't mean that you do that at the cost of putting the entire company in jeopardy, right? So you need to take those calculative bets, right? And all the startups, including in education space or not in education space, irrespective, had their own share of like ups and downs during this last, especially 2 years. There were a lot of startups which actually went to zero during those times. For them now it's a resurrection time. There were a lot of startups which actually went to 100 during those times. For them, some resetting would happen. But in this whole thing, you need to take calculative bets. And in that, yes, being like a cockroach or whatever you want to call it is critical. You need to stay in the game. That's very important. I was, listening to this amazing podcast somewhere in which they give this analogy, and there was a very appropriate quote, which says something like, growth is, growth can wait, right? Survival cannot. Right? So yeah, I think it's like a run rate in cricket, right? You can turn up and turn down the run rate, but if you don't have wickets in hand, run rate doesn't matter. So that's how you need to place this. Although having said that, there's one more thing which I at least keep in mind while I'm thinking about these things. Survival doesn't mean that you should stop innovating, right? And it's not that you just get into your shell and just freeze. That doesn't serve any purpose, right? A startup is meant to innovate, and you need to think about this in such a way that you need to become frugal, you need to be very prudent, but in the same time, not stop innovating, right? And innovation doesn't always cost money and always doesn't cost capital. So have a runway which actually secures you through the entire period is the first and the foremost priority. While doing that, the market is still out there, right? There's no change fundamentally in the market. The only difference is what was happening at a 9x growth might now probably will happen at a 3x kind of a growth, right?
Correct.
But that will happen. So how do you change your internal workings? How do you change your customer acquisition strategies, your operations, so that this resetting doesn't affect your runway is, I think, the most important thing. Because when you are at a 9x, you obviously invest accordingly. But when you are growing at 3x, your investments, your marketing investments, your brand investments, even your fixed cost investments needs to be calibrated accordingly.
Got it.
So that is what I meant when I said that you need to change your approach according to the times, but continue to innovate. So just a point in that direction, Chandra, is we recently came up with this innovation called AI Live. Now, although that has been in works for almost like 17 months now, 16, 17 months, but we believe that fundamentally reduces the price point, so much so that even if, like say, a child is going to an offline, he can still afford this while he is going to an offline. So such innovations obviously help a company weather some of these trends, right? And that's why I always say that innovations are key for a startup, and it should not happen that during these times you completely switch off your innovation thing.
Yeah. In terms of consolidation, since you mentioned consolidation, there's always this buzz that Byjus, was going to buy you out. In fact, there's a joke that Byju calls up Vamsi once a year and says, why don't I buy out Vedantu? ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है?
So, like obviously all of that was in news, right? And it was nothing of that was true at that time. So much so that actually I had gone on record to say that, because it was what it was. It was untrue at that time. In fact, we were racing at that time, and these things obviously caused a lot of energy drain, because then these news articles, unprompted news articles, then causes a lot of questions from employees and potential
But Vedantu
vendors.
is here to kind of, your path will be to IPO, not to get acquired by someone.
So at that time, and even at this time, Chandra, we operate from first principles, and one of those principles between me, Anand and Pulkit, one of our markers of success has always been, right, to create a company which continues to innovate even after our lifetime, right? As long as that is happening, right, and as long as we see a scope for like impact at scale to continue to happen, we don't believe that our reason to exist is not there, right?
Vamsi, how would you compare the current phase, 2022, when people are talking about winter and this, to what you went through in 2016-17? I remember reading about how one investor was supposed to give you money. That investor pulled out last minute. You were just going to have a baby, and you had just 3 weeks of cash to run the company. So you've gone through that. When compared to that, do you feel like you can, cope with anything and face anything that the world throws at you?
Yeah, it's true in a way, right? So I was just remembering when you were asking that question, that those moments. Yeah, it was almost like a near-death experience. And once you are through that, it probably, there's no easy way to put it, but it probably gives you more courage and, let's say, confidence to weather through storms. But as they say, Chandra, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't really wish that situation on anyone. It is obviously very stressful. And yeah, that's exactly what happened. But yeah, we as founders, we need to hustle, we need to struggle. We still believed in the potential and opportunity of online education at that time. We believed in the disruptive potential, because in a country like India, you actually can't solve the last mile problem without using technology. So we believed in all those things, and we just went out there and we told the truth. We told what it is.
But what or who anchors you during such phases when you hit a real low, the rock bottom?
Two things. One is conviction on the bigger vision, but exactly during that time, it's probably to do with teaching. So when we go into that place and teach, and there are kids out there, and when we see that whatever we are doing is adding real value, when we see a comment, when we see a smile, when we see those things, that really transforms. That's really meditative one. That really transforms, because that gives you belief that even if something remains or doesn't remain, right, nothing can stop you from going into a room and teach and broadcast that to the world, right? And that's exactly what we thought during that time, Chandra. In 2017, I remember Pulkit telling me that, यार क्या ही है, right? Worst क्या होगा? सब बंद हो जाएगा, तो भी हम लोग तो पढ़ाएंगे ही, right? So that, I think that elevates all fears, and there's no fear left then, right? Because that nobody can stop me from doing, and as long as that we are able to do, we are seeing that value, because we have been doing this for 16 years now, the teaching and all. So there's conviction in that. So we'll continue to do that, and yeah, people always come up and support in some way or the other, and things happen.
Okay.
What binds the founders of Vedantu together is their love for teaching. After graduating from the IITs in Mumbai and Roorkee, Vamsi and his friends Pulkit Jain, Saurabh Saxena and Anand Prakash quit their jobs to start an offline tuition center called Lakshya in Barnala, Punjab in 2006. The test prep brand was later sold to MT Educare, and the same team started Vedantu in 2014 as they felt online teaching would scale faster and better than offline. While Saxena moved out a few years later, Krishna, Jain and Prakash continue to run Vedantu.
How did you end up in a village in Punjab and then you started an institute there? How did this happen?
Oh, it's a long story, but a fun one. So we were actually 4 of us originally in Lakshya. 2 of us were schoolmates. We studied in Indore together, and I went to IIT Bombay and he went to IIT Roorkee. Pulkit was this person's roommate and Anand was batchmate respectively. We sort of like knew each other in our second year in college.
Yes, second year.
So that's how we knew. And the idea was always to come together and do something together. This was obviously 2005. Startups were not as glamorized as they are today. So we thought of doing something together, middle class families, parents were all strictly against it, succumbed to the parental pressure, joined jobs. But I think after 6 or 7 months, we just we didn't really feel like this is going anywhere. And that's when Anand was the first one to resign from the job.
Anand and Saurabh, they were working in a chemical plant in Punjab, Barnala. So that's how the Punjab connection happened. And the factory worker kids, they used to come to Anand and Saurabh to discuss about what should they do, about their studies, about their education. So that's how that education connect also started happening. And Dil Chahta Hai movie आई थी, so we for the last 2 years we were having our Goa trips together as well. So we were very deeply connected. We went to Punjab, actually met children, went to a school. I think the real moment for us was our that Kendriya Vidyalaya visit on 12th of December 2005.
So I clearly remember we were entering into the classroom and it was like, so we were given only 15 minutes to talk to these kids because factory workers, they came to us and they said, why don't you just guide the kids? And we went in the school, we just got 15 minutes and we were intimidated because the teachers were shouting, kids, keep quiet, because the class was almost 150 and we were intimidated. How will they listen or not? And once we started speaking, there was something which triggered into them, I think. And there was pin drop silence and nobody was talking after that. In fact, the teachers went outside the class, they left us and the session went for 1.5 hours. And at the end of the session, few students started crying listening to our story, that how we from a average, being an average student, went to IIT and could dream of IIT. And they started asking that, can we also get into IIT or start dreaming about that? And they were tears rolling in their eyes, few came for the autograph. So that was the moment.
What resonated there with these young kids was that we told them that children from small places can do great in life. And we have seen many like you in our colleges, who have actually gone ahead and created amazing stories for themselves. That instilled that confidence in those young minds, those young hearts. And we could see that amazing reaction of emotions, of the tears rolling on their faces. And I think that was the trigger for us. Anand, next day, 13th of December 2005, in the morning, he had a 6 a.m. shift. उठ के बोलता भाई मैं तो नहीं जा रहा. So that was it. That did it for us.
So we, by the way, still celebrate that day as the foundation day. So 13th December 2005 is the day we resigned. And we actually celebrate that day as a foundation day because that triggered everything.
But what was your life like at Chandigarh in Punjab? I mean, you were in Chandigarh or Barnala?
Patiala.
We actually started with Barnala, then shifted to Patiala. That's where we actually spent a lot of time. Chandigarh, I think, then 2 years, but majorly.
What was it like running Lakshya vis-a-vis running Vedantu? Was Lakshya more fun, perhaps? Bachelor life? So in a big house, in a mansion.
Absolutely more fun, for sure.
But I'll tell you, the most magical part was, imagine, life when you're surrounded with children entire day. Children who are excited, children who are looking up to you, for their lives to become better. Children who you not just teach, but watch movies with. Children with whom you play cricket with on Sundays, right? It was a magical environment. And I think we just loved every moment of it.
And there were moments.
No, but actually staying together was also like the super crazy fun, because at that time and that age, right, staying together itself was a not normal thing, right? So we had that chance in life. We used to stay together. And Laksh, by the way, being a cash flow positive business, was very different, right? It was we were hardly we were 21 when we started this. And we never fortunately had to see any red. Lakshya was always a stable and a growing business, and we used to have 1 dog, we used to have 2 caretakers, multiple drivers. It was a big koti.
Wow.
We used to play cricket there, right? So it was like fun life.
Super fun.
There used to be rooms, okay? One was a PlayStation room, one was a Wii room, like that. I think in 2010 itself, when we were scaling Lakshya, right? We were in one location, we scaled it to some 4-5 locations in the span of 6 years. That's when first time we started noticing that there are issues around scaling an offline business, right? There were challenges around scalability of quality teachers in especially remote tier 3, tier 4 locations. How do you get them? More importantly, how do you retain them? We had amazing impact stories coming from the small towns of Barnala and Patiala. अब इसको scale करना था. So when we scaled it, we noticed that there are challenges, and we then tried doing this for 2 years, 2.5 years of scaling through offline centers. And then we realized that it will take 100 years to create any impact at scale. And that's when Pulkit, and like all of us discussed that technology is probably the solution. I should also say that this was also a time when Flipkarts and all were opening up. Like,
so that inspired.
That was an inspiration. And Pulkit was the first one. We released him operationally. And he's the first one who came to Bangalore with few of his juniors of IIT Roorkee. So the idea was figure out something using technology which can help scale this faster.
Do you guys fight a lot on who will teach what subject, who will teach what slot? Is that the main bone of contention?
No, we used to. So I'll tell you what we had a very famous dining table in our house way back in 2006-7 days. So every night we used to sit around that dining table and used to have our dining table discussions come fights on as silly things as आज तूने physics में ये Newton's law कैसे पढ़ाया, right? But I really when I look back, this is so important, and I think everybody who's starting together, to find that equation where you respect each other's abilities, you respect the differences, you respect every viewpoint is so important, and I think it took us 2 years to reach to that point.
So I remember this story around it. At the end of the first year, we used to fight on these small silly things, and I don't know what happened. Some God sent message to us, and we went to Kasoli.
Kasoli कहते हैं, yes.
So we went to Kasoli, and we sat together and we said, यार हम एक दूसरे को criticize करते हैं. We are trying to look each other from our lens, right? So why don't we actually put our strengths at the center and discuss about that? And we started talking about each other's strengths. तेरी ये strength है, तेरी ये strength है. And then at the end of that, the entire night session, it happened over the night. We realized that there's so much of strength, and why we are actually
focusing on the
weaknesses. Yeah. And suddenly after that, I think that was the turning point, and we never ever. So that day we had lot of debate, discussion, and we came to conclusion that we'll never ever talk about weakness of the other guy ever. And till date, I think it's been 17-18 years. It has been like I think not a single day. Today though, I think if Vamsi is doing anything or Pulkit is doing anything, I will just know by the gesture that what he is going through or what he is thinking.
We know each other more than our parents and wives.
Yes.
Okay. So finally, do Goa trips still happen?
Yes. It's an annual pilgrimage for us.
The Dil Chahta Hai point.
Every year.
We actually call it annual pilgrimage. It's pretty famous in the company also. Like now in COVID, obviously because of that, like when it didn't happen, the folks in the company got like little scared. Like oh, nahi jao aap log, right? This
on that point, अपने last year के pending है.
Yeah. So every time we go there with now it is more like reflection, and it's more like every time we go there we get some idea. Yeah, this
is it also true that Vamsi like takes off every Thursday to think? ऐसा मैंने सुना है. ऐसा भी होता है?
So I started doing it.
Okay.
Not been like
but why Thursday? Why not Monday, Tuesday? Like Thursday.
No, so the schedule works out in such a way that like Thursday is like otherwise the staff meetings and all that, like somehow it's Thursday. Second half is what I block off from the calendar, and I just keep it free. It's not that it's intentional I have to think on something. It's just I've learned that by just not keeping anything and not doing anything is also very important. It triggers lot of things. Yeah.
Monday को तो fast होता है ना?
वो story भी बताने वाला था. Monday is his fast day. 12 to 6 he doesn't eat anything.
Why? मन्नत है कुछ?
नहीं ये हमें भी नहीं समझ में आया तक.
12 to 6.
12 to 6 है वो.
इतने सारे पाप किए हुए हैं लोगों ने, तो उसका प्रायश्चित करने के लिए I have to keep those fast.
12 to 6. आज तक समझ नहीं है 12 to 6.
Vamsi, I hope you managed to get some good shots
Yes, I
On
did.
the
It's beautiful
Gara
weather.
Lake.
Yeah.
But apart from photography, what are your other passions? When
Well-
you're not teaching and running Vedantu.
Well, apart from photography, I love to play poker.
Oh.
And yes, and
Do you
back-
win?
I was very deep in it in 2000, like some 6-7 years back. And one of my wish was to go and play the WSOP,
Okay.
right? But then good sense prevailed, and I said like everything requires depth and energy. So sort of like focused on Vedantu since then. But yeah, I have played in outside India casinos as well, and yeah, managed to do well.
Okay.
there. Apart from that, badminton is something which I find time to play.
You have 2 young kids. Do you teach them maths and physics as well? Are they too young for it? Do you want them to go to the IIT as well?
IIT is a long way out, so I'm not thinking of that. My wife expects me, obviously because I'm a teacher, expects me to teach them something. And I tried doing that, but then I realized that, you know what, there's no way you can teach your own kids. So probably I'll just like put them to some other good teacher.
Right.
Just like,
Vamsi, you know, as we come to the end of the interview, I also want to address some of the concerns around edtech, right? In terms of aggressive selling, overselling, mis-selling. Parents have complained about this in the past. And if you look at what's happened with China,
Yes.
they have cracked down on
Yes.
edtech with regulations. Here we are seeing players themselves come up with some self-regulation. Do you think this is going to be the biggest risk for you, at least from a policy standpoint, regulation standpoint?
I do see this as a challenge, right? And this challenge has sort of multiplied, especially in the last, like the COVID times, because the number of parents and the number of students actually has an influx increased itself. So the percentage, although however small, the number of cases did increase. We've been very conscious about 2 of these aspects. One is, as you said, this is one aspect, and there have been multiple cases, even at Vedantu level also, we've been exposed to, and we have taken some very proactive steps. One of the things which you said, as an industry, we are coming together to define some of the standard ways of operating, be it around not just selling, but even if, let's say, mis-selling has been reported to you, how fast are you going to act on it? How fast, how friendly are your refund policies? See, these are all very important because education at the end of the day is a trust business, right? And if you don't invoke trust, and these are all trust markers, right? I mean, there's only so much far you can go. That's one very big aspect which we try to address. Chandra, there's another aspect which actually came to our, in our site, in especially the last 2 years, and which is to do around child safety. So not all of us as parents, right, were aware about this issue before COVID, right? When in COVID, like all the children suddenly got exposed to online in Vedantu also and outside Vedantu also. This online safety of children exposed to online tutoring or other services is a very important topic, and that is something which we got exposed to early 2020. There have been some cases which we saw, and we were ourselves very surprised because we were caught like unguarded. After that, we actually went in and sort of not just tied up with some of the best experts out there, but also created our own stack of online child safety.
Got it. So we are in the final minutes of the interview, and we are going to end with a quick rapid fire.
Oh.
Are you ready? No, not as tough as cracking JEE.
Okay, bring it on. I'll try my best. Will I get
Okay.
a gift hamper at the end of it or something?
No gift hamper. I will just say well done. Okay, online or offline?
Online.
Physics or maths?
Physics.
Okay. JEE or NEET?
JEE.
Indore or Bengaluru?
Indore.
3 tips for cracking JEE.
Start early, be persistent, and just don't give up.
Teacher or entrepreneur?
Teacher.
Your highest point as an entrepreneur?
After 2017, when we actually saw an all-time low, and we were literally weeks away from shutdown, then after 3 months, we secured one round with Omedia. So after literally a near-death experience, doing that was a very big high.
On that note, thank you very much for joining us on Bits to Bits.
Thank you, Chandra. Pleasure.